Here's an idea. Just because news is bad, that doesn't mean that it's fake. There's been all kinds of talk recently about fake news, by which people normally mean incorrect or invented information, unsourced claims, or patently outlandish assertions, often aimed at stirring the political doo-doo. Fake news is even thought to have played a meaningful part in the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Fake news has become such a topic of discussion that many sources have put together resources for spotting it. The Guardian did a piece in December, Cyborgology talked about fake news and the aesthetics of objectivity in January. On the Media drafted a breaking news consumer handbook, Fake News Edition. And I recommend them all, sources in the doobly-doo. They've certainly helped me in the new news media landscape. We are gonna do something different. We're not gonna talk about how to spot fake news. We're gonna talk about how not to spot fake news, about how certain news items can seem suspect, but not all blemishes make their stories necessarily fake. Fake news, fully fabricated and false news, isn't the only way that news can be bad or troublesome. And because a story is bad or troublesome, that doesn't make it fake. By unquestioningly dismissing it as such, you may be doing yourself a disservice as a concerned citizen hoping to stay informed. And we're gonna talk about what isn't fake news by using Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman's book, Manufacturing Consent, as our guide. If you're unfamiliar, these gents argue that news media can function in subtle, even unmeaning ways to get people to agree with the news source and one another on the issues of the day and on political and economic positions which largely benefit the powerful. They call this ability the news media's propaganda function, and they claim that it's built into the very structure of media itself, even media which you'd never point at and go, hey, that's a propaganda. Hold your news horses though, there's an important distinction here between propaganda function and propaganda. Lots of fake news is, in fact, literal propaganda, misleading information used to promote a political viewpoint. Real, true news that reports on facts may function in a way like propaganda, but still itself not be propaganda as such, in that it does have a basis in observable fact. And that is where lots of confusion arises, and where we get people calling verifiable stories reported by major news outlets fake news, when in fact it's legit news those people simply disagree with, or which has maybe lost its way a little. So we're gonna spend this episode talking about what Chomsky and Herman call the 5 filters that news must pass through to be made, and how those affect the creation of even real news. We're gonna use these filters to help us identify the propaganda function of news, while considering how they don't necessarily make that news fake. The first filter has to do with the size of media organizations and why they make media in the first place. News companies are huge, with massive budgets and often they're subsidiaries of even larger conglomerates. And those conglomerates wanna make bank. This means 2 things. First, news orgs probably won't publish stories that talk bad about their own conglomerates. And as media gets increasingly consolidated, the number of off-limits subjects would likely grow, including even capitalism itself. You know what they say? Don't bite the hand that writes the fatty paychecks. Second, the consolidation also means the little guy can't break into the industry and provide meaningful competition. The internet does provide a voice to individuals and small organizations, but for the most part, this is different in size, reach, and authority than the established news media. Normally, massive corporations are the ones who guide the national conversation. Fake news has, in fact, challenged the second half of this first filter. By taking advantage of algorithmic news aggregation, we did an episode about that, fake news swayed public opinion to the degree that we now have to make this episode about that. But on the first point, because news is produced by a corporation doesn't automatically make it fake or false. Corporate relationships often mean a news organization is quiet on certain topics or cagey on others, but for better and worse, it is often the resources available only to large corporate news that results in the realist form of journalism, access to politicians, expert sources, time and money to research, dig, and verify. Ideally, all newsmakers are very clearly disclosing financial relationships and potential conflicts of interest. This is not always the case, but in the way the use of a fallacy doesn't necessarily make an argument wrong, corporate structures don't necessarily mean a story is false or an outlet is fake. Most commercial news sources must sell advertising space around their work to stay in business. This means that advertiser happiness is essential to the survival of a media company, and getting involved in political or social controversies, taking any kind of editorial risk, could threaten the good cheer and therefore generosity of one's advertisers. And the stakes are high. Chomsky and Herman note that a 1% TV audience drop equals a loss of $80 to $100 million in 1988. Ideally, ad sales and editorial are totally isolated, but that's easier said than done. So publishers find a happy editorial medium where news is useful, keeps audiences coming back, and advertisers grinning. If the reporting is stale, sad, or sensitive, even if it's important, there's a chance that the budget suffers. Interestingly, fake news tends to be more ad-supported than your standard legit news publisher, who also benefits from grants, subsidies, or subscriptions. On the Media points out that most fake news websites are slathered in ads since other revenue opportunities are out of reach. So it may be a question of degree, but simply because there are ads present doesn't mean a story has been bought and paid for by commercial interests, though it can have an impact on the kinds of stories that are run. And additionally, it's a sign of the unfortunate requirements of reporting what is literally the case under capitalism. No matter how large the media company, you can't be everywhere all the time or have expertise on everything going down. So newsmakers need sources. Civilians, governments, organizations, and experts, all of whom have their own perspectives and agendas. And what's worse, publicly challenging those sources and even refusing them can jeopardize future access. So it's often in the interest of even legit newsmakers to report what they're told and how they're told without asking too many questions or causing trouble, so they'll continue being told anything at all in the future. This is unfortunate and complicated. Ideally, for instance, a major news publisher would be able to call out a source on a falsehood without fear of jeopardizing access or their own existence. But the ineffective handling of squirrely sources by legit news is different from fake news, which often has no sources, a single unverified source, uses itself or the feelings and assumptions of the author as a source without marking the piece's opinion, or uses outdated, disproven, or suspicious sources, including other fake news outlets. It's a good rule of thumb to always cross-reference the sources of a news story, no matter where it's from. With fake news, often there's nothing or very little to even cross-reference. Filter 4 is called flack. Flack is the negative response newsmakers endure for covering a particular issue. Letters of complaint, petitions, lawsuits, and of course, tweets, Facebook posts, YouTube comments, and 45-minute long response videos. Chomsky and Herman point out that lobbies used to produce the worst flack. Today, flack is largely the result of individuals brigading on the wings of their righteous outrage. Organizations, people, and communities form what Chomsky and Herman call flack machines, generating so much negative PR around a story that they bury the reporting under mountains of distracting vitriol. This often happens, they say, when newsmakers question the status quo. Flack is one way for those with enough power to convene a flack machine to maintain their power. One of the central responsibilities of journalism is reporting unfavorably on those in positions of authority, and that has consequences which sometimes even legit news outlets will be fearful of. But if people are upset about a story, that doesn't mean it's false. And as a matter of fact, it can mean exactly the opposite. An inconvenient truth may convene a flack machine more quickly and violently than a falsehood. Still, you should always be deeply suspicious of stories that thrive on anger or align exactly with your frustrations and fears about the world. Be mindful of the difference between being mad at a piece of reporting and being mad with a piece of reporting. Fake news is often part of the flack machine itself. Our fifth and final filter is called anti-communism. Manufacturing consent was written in 1988 during the end of the Cold War, so communism was the threat keeping everyone up at night. In the updated edition, Chomsky and Herman refer simply to fear of the other. Media has the power to label any group as outsiders, thus making the public afraid of that group. And as Chomsky wrote, when the public is afraid, they accept authority. They keep up with the news, which is telling them everything they need to know about how totally boned they are. Sort of like media Stockholm syndrome. Unfortunately, both legit and fake news rely on fear to keep people glued to their screens and therefore generating revenue. While you'd hope the difference would be a matter of degree, even legit journalists can get carried away stoking the flames of fear and aren't reeled in by their producers or editors. Like with flack, you should be skeptical of any story or publisher which consistently makes you feel more afraid than informed. It may not be fake, both real and fake news reflect the tensions and biases of their moment, but in my opinion, neither is it worth your time or money. The ideal goals of journalism are to challenge, inform, and hold accountable, not to pander, enrage, or exacerbate. Staying vigilant in spotting fake news is important, more important than it's been in the recent past, especially when it comes to political news. However, vigilance over fake news shouldn't replace vigilance over the real news or encourage us to conflate the two. Factual reporting can and usually is filtered through corporations, advertisers, sources, audiences, and even fear itself. so we should be doubly prepared, ready to refuse the fake and hold accountable the true. There will be no comment response video for this video, but if you want to let us know how you do and do not spot fake news in the comments below, we'll be there. In this week's comment response video, we talk about your thoughts regarding the hoodie. If you want to watch that one, you can find a link in the description or wait for the end card to show up. Idea Channel has a Patreon. Thank you so much to all of our current patrons for their support. If you want to help the show, you can head over to patreon.com/PBS Idea Channel. We also have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit. The tweet of the week comes from Silnan, who points us towards a parody Zizek review of that new Taco Bell food item that is the like fried chicken taco. It gets real good real quick, especially if you like laughing at Zizek, which, I mean, you know how we do. And last but certainly not least, this week's episode would not have been possible or good without the very hard work of this well-oiled flack machine. Oh, one more thing before we go. I'm here with Anna from Gross Science, which is a PBS Digital Studio show that's kind of about the like squishy, gross, grotesque side of science. And I was wondering if you could just tell us really quick, like, what makes something gross?
Right, so that's a really good question. And I think that things that are gross are things that remind us that we're like no different than animals.
Okay.
And I think that's unsettling because it reminds us that we are mortal and can die.
So like you see the parts of your body that remind you that you're just like a meat thing.
Yeah, that you are sort of like a bag of flesh and liquids and some bones, and you know, it's all very fragile.
So if you would like constant reminders that you are a bag of liquid and flesh and bones, you definitely have to check out Gross Science.
Thanks, Mike.